a sense of peace, or a moment of clarity that helps us make an important decision. Other times, his guidance is subtle, and we have to trust that he is working behind the scenes, even when we don't understand what's happening. This is where faith comes into play. We may not always see the path clearly, but we can trust that God is leading us, even when the way seems uncertain. We must learn to trust in his timing, his plan, and his ability to bring us exactly where we need to be. In life, we often find ourselves at crossroads, moments when we have to choose a direction. It can be difficult to know which way to go, especially when the options seem unclear or when we face a difficult decision. In those moments, we must remind ourselves that God's guidance is never a matter of chance. We can seek his will through prayer, through his word, and through the wise counsel of others. When we trust God with our decisions, we can be confident that he will lead us in the right direction. Even when we feel like we've made a wrong turn or taken a detour, we can trust that God is still at work, guiding us back on track and using the detours for our ultimate good. It's easy to look at life and think that everything happens by coincidence. We may wonder why certain things happen to us, or why some events seem to unfold with perfect timing while others seem to make no sense at all. But the truth is that God is always guiding us, even in the moments when we don't see it. Every step we take, every path we walk, and every encounter we have is part of God's plan for our lives. We are not just drifting through life, hoping for the best. We are being led step by step by the hand of a loving and purposeful God. And when we experience challenges, setbacks, or moments of confusion, we can be assured that God is still guiding us. He doesn't leave us in the dark. His guidance is constant and his purpose for our lives is sure. Even in the midst of struggle, we can trust that God is using the circumstances to shape us, refine us, and lead us closer to the destiny he has prepared for us. It's in these moments when we feel like we're lost or confused that we must remind ourselves there is no coincidence. God is guiding us. Every moment, every decision, every encounter is part of a plan that is far greater than we can see. Our lives are not random. They are divinely orchestrated, led by the hand of a God who loves us and is committed to seeing us fulfill our purpose. So when you find yourself in the midst of life's uncertainties, know that you are not walking alone. You are being guided, not by chance, but by the will of a loving God who has a plan for you. Life has a way of throwing us curveballs when we least expect them. It feels as though just when we think we have everything in place, something unexpected happens and the ground beneath us shifts. We can experience loss, heartbreak, confusion, or face a seemingly insurmountable challenge. It's in these moments of struggle, when we feel isolated or overwhelmed, that we often ask the question, where is God in all of this? How could he be near when everything around me is falling apart? It is easy to think that in times of suffering, God is distant or absent, as if he has turned away from our pain. But the truth is, even in our darkest moments, God is closer to us than we might ever realize. In fact, it is often in our struggles that we are most aware of his presence. When we go through difficult times, we can sometimes feel abandoned, as though God is nowhere to be found. The pain may feel so intense that it becomes hard to see beyond it. But God's word reminds us that he is always near, even when we can't feel him. Psalm 34:18 says, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." This verse reveals an important truth. God is not far away from us in our struggles. He is near to the brokenhearted, close to those who are feeling crushed and overwhelmed. It's not that he waits for us to overcome our struggles first before he comes near. No, he is right there with us in the pain, offering comfort, peace, and hope. Our struggles, as difficult as they may be, are never a sign that God has abandoned us. In fact, they are often the places where we experience his presence most profoundly. Just as a parent draws closer to their child who is struggling, God, in his love and mercy, draws closer to us when we are hurting, in those moments when we feel like we can't go on, he is holding us, comforting us, and gently whispering words of encouragement into our spirits. Think about the story of the Apostle Paul, who faced numerous trials and hardships throughout his ministry. He was shipwrecked, beaten, imprisoned, and faced constant opposition. But even in the midst of all his suffering, Paul was aware of God's presence. In 2 Corinthians 12:9, Paul writes about how God responded to his struggle, but he said to me, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me." Paul's struggles did not drive God away. Instead, they became the very space where God's grace and power were revealed most clearly. Paul came to understand that it was in his weakness that God's strength was made perfect. Even in the darkest moments of his life, God was right there, close to him, giving him the strength to endure. When we face trials, it's easy to believe the lie that God has abandoned us, that he has left us to navigate life on our own. But the truth is, God has not gone anywhere. In fact, he is closer than ever, especially when we are suffering. We need to remember that God's presence is not dependent on our circumstances. Whether we are experiencing joy or sorrow, success or failure, God is always with us. The psalmist declares in Psalm 139, 7-10, "Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there." These verses remind us that God's presence is everywhere, and there is no place where we can go, no situation in which we can find ourselves where he is not present with us. The struggles we face are not signs of God's absence. Rather, they are opportunities for us to draw near to him. In our pain, we can come to know God in ways we might not have otherwise. Our trials have a way of breaking down the walls we build around our hearts, allowing us to experience a deeper intimacy with God. When things are going well, it's easy to rely on our own strength and forget about God's constant presence. But when life is hard, when we are weak and vulnerable, we are often more open to receiving his comfort and help. It's in these moments of struggle that we are reminded that we cannot make it on our own. And that is when we learn to depend on God in a deeper way. There are countless examples in the Bible of people who experienced struggles but found God to be near them in the midst of their pain. Think about Job, who lost everything, his wealth, his health, and even his family. He was in unimaginable pain, both physically and emotionally, yet he never stopped seeking God. Even when his friends turned against him and his wife urged him to curse God, Job chose to cling to his faith. In Job 42:5, after his period of suffering, Job declares, "My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you." Job's suffering led him to a deeper understanding of God's presence. His struggles did not push God away. Rather, they brought him into a closer relationship with the Creator. Job experienced God in a way that he could not have before his trials. Another example is that of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he faced the agony of knowing what lay ahead. Jesus was about to endure betrayal, false accusations, and the horrific pain of crucifixion. As he prayed in the garden, his soul was overwhelmed with sorrow, and he asked God if it were possible to take away the suffering that awaited him. Yet, even in his distress, Jesus chose to submit to God's will. He trusted that God's plan, though painful, was for the greater good. In his greatest moment of struggle, Jesus was not abandoned by God. He was sustained by God's presence, knowing that his Father was near, even in the most difficult of circumstances. Our struggles may feel isolating, but they do not separate us from God. In fact, they often bring us closer to him. The pain we experience can serve as a catalyst for spiritual growth and transformation. In Romans 8:28, we are reminded that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. This doesn't mean that everything we go through will feel good in the moment, But it does mean that God can use every trial, every moment of suffering to bring about something good. Even in the depths of our pain, God is working on our behalf, molding us, shaping us, and drawing us nearer to Him. In our struggles, we must also remember that God is not just standing by watching us suffer. He is actively involved in our pain. He is not a distant God who has no understanding of what we are going through. Jesus, who was fully God and fully man, experienced suffering in a way that we can never fully comprehend. He endured the pain of rejection, betrayal, and crucifixion. Because of his sacrifice, we have a high priest who understands our struggles and intercedes for us. Hebrews 4:15 and 16 reminds us, "For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses. But we have one who has been tempted in every way just as we are, yet he did not sin." Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. In our struggles, we can take comfort in knowing that Jesus understands what we are going through, and he is there to offer us grace, mercy, and strength to endure. When we are struggling, we don't have to face it alone. God's presence is with us, and his grace is sufficient. In 1 Corinthians 12:9, God tells Paul, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." It is in our weakness that God's power is most evident. We may not have the strength to make it through on our own, but God's strength is more than enough. Even in the midst of our struggles, we can rest in the knowledge that God is close, offering his help, his comfort, and his peace. Our struggles are not without purpose, and they do not define us. Even in the hardest times, God is with us, working to bring about his good purposes in our lives. No matter what we face, we can be assured of this truth. God is close to the brokenhearted. He is near to those who are suffering, and he will never leave us nor forsake us. Through every trial, he is right beside us, offering his presence and his strength to carry us through. There are moments in life when we feel like we're walking on a path full of uncertainties, unsure of where we're headed or what the future holds. The road ahead can often seem unclear, and the process of getting there can feel long, tiring, and filled with obstacles. It's easy to become discouraged, to wonder if we're on the right track, or if we'll ever reach the destination we dream of. But there is a deep truth that we must hold on to. The journey itself is just as important as the destination. Trusting the process and the path we're on, even when things don't make sense, is an essential part of the divine plan God has for our lives. At the core of this idea is the concept of trust. Trust is an act of faith, an act of surrender to the process that is unfolding, even when we can't see the full picture. It's easy to trust when things are going well, when everything seems to align perfectly, and when the results are clear. But what about when things don't go according to plan? What about when life throws curveballs, when we face setbacks, or when we feel like we're not moving forward at all? In those moments, it takes real courage to trust that God is still at work and that his plan is greater than what we can see in the present. Trusting the process means having the confidence that God is with us in every step, guiding us, shaping us, and leading us toward the fulfillment of his purpose for our lives. Even when we face difficulties, delays, or detours, we can trust that God is using these experiences to refine us, build our character, and prepare us for what lies ahead. Life is not a series of random events or coincidences. It is a journey of divine intention, and every step, no matter how challenging or painful, is part of a much greater story that God is writing. The Bible speaks to this truth in many ways. One of the most powerful verses that remind us to trust the process is Proverbs 3:5-6, which says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight." These words remind us that our understanding is limited. We might not always know why certain things are happening in our lives, but God sees the bigger picture. He knows where the path leads and how each step we take is moving us closer to His plan. When we trust Him and surrender our understanding to His wisdom, He promises that He will make our path straight. The process of life often feels long and challenging. We can face seasons where things don't seem to be progressing as we hoped, or where our goals seem just out of reach. It's easy to become frustrated when we don't see immediate results, or when our dreams feel far away. But this is where trust becomes crucial. We have to trust that the process of waiting, growing, and learning is not in vain. Sometimes the journey itself is teaching us important lessons that we need for the next stage of our lives. In the same way that a seed must be buried and undergo a process of growth before it can become a beautiful flower or a tall tree, our lives go through seasons of development before we can fully step into the fullness of what God has in store for us. Consider the example of Joseph in the Bible. Joseph's journey was filled with hardship, betrayal, and years of waiting. He was sold into slavery by his brothers, falsely accused and thrown into prison. If anyone had reason to doubt the process, it was Joseph. Yet, through all of his suffering, Joseph never lost sight of the fact that God had a plan for his life. In the end, Joseph was elevated to a position of great authority in Egypt, and he was able to save not only Egypt, but his own family from famine. Joseph trusted the process, even when it seemed like his circumstances were leading him further away from his dreams. He understood that God was at work in the waiting and that the process was preparing him for something greater. Similarly, we are called to trust the process in our own lives, even when the road feels hard or the destination seems distant. God's timing is different from ours, and what seems like a delay or a detour might actually be an opportunity for growth. Every setback, every challenge, and every moment of waiting is part of God's divine plan, shaping us and preparing us for the future He has designed. We may not understand why certain things happen or why we have to go through certain difficulties, but we can trust that God is working all things together for our good, as Romans 8:28 assures us. Another important aspect of trusting the process is embracing the idea of personal growth and transformation. The journey we are on is not just about reaching a destination, it's about becoming the person God has called us to be along the way. The path may not always be smooth, and the process may involve stretching and challenging our faith, but it is in these moments that we are refined and transformed. God uses the ups and downs, the successes and the failures to shape our character and develop in us qualities like patience, perseverance, and humility. These qualities are essential for the future God has for us, and they can only be cultivated through the process of living out our journey. In James 1:2 and 4, we are reminded that trials are not something to fear or avoid, but rather they are opportunities for growth. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. Trials and difficulties are not signs of God's abandonment. They are opportunities for our faith to be strengthened and our character to be refined. The process of enduring hardships is not easy, but it is necessary for our spiritual maturity. Trusting the process also means learning to be content in every season of life. It's easy to become focused on what we don't have or where we're not yet. But true trust comes when we can find peace in the present moment, knowing that God is at work. Philippians 4:11-13 teaches us that contentment is not dependent on our circumstances, but on our trust in God. Paul writes, I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through Him who gives me strength. Whether we are in a season of abundance or a season of scarcity, Whether we are moving forward quickly or waiting patiently, we can trust that God is with us and that He is working everything out for our good. The process and the path may not always be easy, but they are always necessary. It's through the process that we are shaped, refined, and prepared for the future that God has for us. Just as a runner must train and endure rigorous practices to reach the finish line, we too must trust that the challenges we face are part of the process that is leading us toward our goal. The path may seem long, and at times it may feel like we're not getting anywhere. But if we trust God with the journey, we will eventually see the fruits of our labor. Our trust in God during the process will lead us to a place of fulfillment and purpose that we could never have reached without the challenges we faced along the way. It's important to remember that God is not just concerned with where we end up. He is concerned with who we become along the way. The process of getting to where we're going is just as important as the destination itself. When we trust the process and the path, we allow God to work in our hearts and mold us into the people He created us to be. The process may be difficult, but it is never in vain. God is always at work, using every moment, every step, and every trial to shape us into His image and bring us closer to the destiny He has for us. And when we trust that, we can find peace and joy in every season of life, knowing that He is guiding us step by step towards something greater than we could ever imagine. There are moments in life when everything aligns in a way that is beyond our understanding. Moments when events unfold that leave us speechless and unable to explain them away as mere coincidence. We find ourselves standing at the crossroads of destiny and purpose, unsure of how we got here, but certain that there is a greater force at work. It is in these moments that we come to the realization that despite our confusion, there is no such thing as coincidence. God is guiding us. Now, some may say that it's all just luck or chance, a series of random occurrences that fall into place by sheer happenstance. But I want to challenge that thinking today. I want to challenge you to consider something deeper, something more powerful than fate. What if everything that happens in your life is not a fluke, but a design? What if each step you take, each turn you make, and each door that opens is part of a divine orchestration that has been set into motion long before you even had the awareness to notice? Look, I know that sometimes life doesn't make sense. We go through hardships that seem unbearable, and the weight of the world falls on our shoulders. We question, we doubt, and sometimes we even want to give up. But hear me today, God is never absent in the midst of your struggle. In fact, it's in those moments that He is closest to you, guiding you through paths that, though difficult, lead to growth, transformation, and ultimately to the fulfillment of His purpose in your life. Let me take you to a place where we can see this truth unfold in the lives of those who walk before us. Think about the story of Joseph. You know the one, the young man with a dream, betrayed by his brother, sold into slavery and thrown into prison. If anyone ever had reason to believe that their life was a series of unfortunate events, it was Joseph. But look closer and you'll see something incredible. God was with him every step of the way. It wasn't coincidence that Joseph ended up in Potiphar's house. It wasn't by random chance that he interpreted the dreams of Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker. Every event, every trial, every setback was part of a greater plan. It was as if God was using each of those moments to prepare Joseph for a future he couldn't yet see, but was always destined to walk into. And when the time was right, when the plan was fully revealed, Joseph was elevated to a position where he could save nations, reconcile with his family, and step into his divine purpose. If God can do that for Joseph, can He not do the same for you? I'm here to tell you today, it's no coincidence that you are where you are. You may feel as though life is out of your control, but let me remind you that God is never caught off guard. He is orchestrating every step, even the difficult ones, for your ultimate good. The bumps in the road, the detours, the times when you felt stuck, those were not mistakes. They were divine appointments set in motion by God to bring you closer to your purpose. Let's talk about the times when we feel lost, the moments when it feels like we are walking in darkness. It's easy to think that when we are in the dark, we are alone, that God has abandoned us. But let me remind you that the darkness is often the place where God does his greatest work. Think about Moses standing in front of the Red Sea with the Egyptian army closing in behind him. It was a dark moment. A moment of uncertainty, fear, and despair. But God wasn't absent. He was right there, preparing to part the sea to make a way where there seemed to be no way. That wasn't coincidence. That was God's guidance. When you find yourself in your own Red Sea moment, standing at the edge of what seems like an impossible situation, I need you to remember this. God is always at work behind the scenes. Even when you can't see it, even when you don't understand it, he is laying out the path before you. And you are not walking it alone. He is guiding you step by step into something greater than you could ever imagine. It's easy to look at life and assume that things happen randomly, that things fall into place by chance. But I want to encourage you to think higher, to rise above the surface level of understanding and realize that there is a divine hand at work. There are times when you will encounter people at just the right moment. Opportunities will open up that seem too good to be true, and things will align in ways that leave you speechless. Those are not just coincidences. They are the fingerprints of God on your life, guiding you to where you need to be. God's guidance often comes in unexpected ways. We can't always predict how he will lead us, but we can trust that he will. There are times when he will lead us through the quiet whisper of his spirit, other times through the advice of a friend or a mentor. Sometimes he will guide us through our circumstances, using the events of our lives to direct us toward the right path. But one thing is certain, his guidance is always intentional. It's never random, it's never a mistake. Let me remind you that God's guidance is not just for the big moment. It's for every moment of your life. From the seemingly mundane to the extraordinary, God is leading you. You might not always see it, and you might not always feel it, but he is at work in the everyday moments of your life. When you wake up in the morning, when you go to work, when you interact with others, those are moments of guidance. Those are the times when God is positioning you, preparing you, and aligning things in your favor. It's no coincidence that you are where you are. God has you right where you need to be. And in the times when things seem out of control, when the storms of life are raging, I want you to hold on to this truth. God is still guiding you. Just as he led the Israelites through the wilderness, he is leading you through your own wilderness. It may feel like you are wandering, but you are not lost. God has a plan, and he is with you every step of the way. When you feel like you've hit a wall, when you feel like you can't go on, don't give up. Don't throw in the towel. Look up and look around, because there is a divine guidance at work in your life that is stronger than any obstacle you may face. God is leading you to a place of victory. You may not see it yet, but the path is being laid out before you. There is no coincidence in God's plan for your life. Every detail, every encounter, every struggle, and every triumph is part of a grand design. You are not just wandering through life hoping for the best. You are being guided. Every moment is a step towards something greater, something more powerful, something that will bring glory to God and fulfillment to your soul. Don't overlook the signs, don't ignore the guidance, and don't doubt that God is leading you exactly where you need to be. So when life gets hard, when it feels like nothing is going your way, remember this: God is guiding you. There is no coincidence, no random chance, no fluke. You are exactly where you need to be, and you are on the path that he has set for you. Trust in his guidance, trust in his plan, and know that he will never leave you or forsake you. Every moment in life, every opportunity, every setback, is part of a greater divine design. There is no coincidence in God's plan. Everything happens for a purpose, and God is guiding you step by step toward your destiny. In the hardest moments of life, when we feel lost or abandoned, God is working behind the scenes. Every trial is an opportunity for growth and transformation, leading you closer to your divine purpose and the fulfillment of God's will. Life may not always make sense, and we may not always see the bigger picture. However, God's guidance is intentional and purposeful. Trust in His plan, remain patient, and know that He is always leading you to a greater purpose, even when the way forward seems unclear. There are moments in life when things seem to fall into place with perfect timing, and for a brief instant, we feel as though we've discovered some hidden secret or universal truth. It's as if everything aligns just right, and we marvel at how something so intricate could happen by sheer chance. But when we stop to reflect deeply on these moments, we come to a profound realization: nothing in life happens by chance. There is no such thing as coincidence in the eyes of God. Every event, every encounter, and every moment is part of a divine plan that is far beyond our comprehension. When we think about life and its many twists and turns, we often attribute the things that go right to luck or fortune. And when things don't go as planned, we wonder if we've made a mistake or taken a wrong turn. But what if every moment is more than just a random series of events? What if there is a divine hand guiding us through every experience, both good and bad, leading us toward a greater purpose? What if every moment of joy, every setback, and every twist in the journey is precisely the way God has designed it? We live in a world where it's easy to fall into the trap of believing that things just happen because of chance or accident. After all, we see coincidences in life every day. A phone call from a friend you haven't heard from in years, just when you needed encouragement, the job offer that arrives just as you're about to give up on finding work, a perfect opportunity that comes out of nowhere, seemingly by chance. The world is full of these moments, and on the surface, it's easy to brush them off as random occurrences. But when we consider the depth of God's involvement in our lives, we begin to see these moments not as coincidences, but as signs of God's active guidance. God's guidance in our lives is purposeful and intentional. The Bible makes it clear that God is always at work, orchestrating the events of our lives according to His plan and His will. Proverbs 16:9 says, "In their hearts humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps." This verse reminds us that we can make our plans, but ultimately it is God who directs our paths. Every step, every detour, every closed door, and every open window is part of His divine guidance. There is no random or accidental moment in God's design. Everything is purposeful, crafted by His hands, and planned before we even take our first breath. When we look back on our lives, we can often see how the pieces fit together in ways we never could have predicted. Maybe we went through a difficult season or struggled in a particular area, and at the time, it felt like we were stuck or lost. But as we look back, we see how those very struggles shaped us, built our character, and led us to where we are today. The challenges that once seemed like setbacks were, in fact, the very things that prepared us for the future. We can begin to understand that those moments weren't mistakes or accidents. They were part of God's perfect plan. In the same way, we often encounter people at just the right moment, people who seem to appear in our lives at a time when we need them most. Some of these people are friends, family members, or even strangers who offer a word of encouragement, a helping hand, or a new opportunity. At first glance, it might seem like these people showed up by chance, But as we reflect on the timing and the impact of their presence in our lives, we realize that it was God who orchestrated these encounters. He knew exactly who and what we needed at that moment, and he brought them into our lives with perfect timing. Consider the story of Ruth in the Bible. Ruth, a widow, found herself in a foreign land with no apparent future or hope. She could have easily fallen into despair, but she chose to stay faithful to her mother-in-law, Naomi, and it was in that act of loyalty and faithfulness that she found favor with God. Ruth ended up meeting Boaz, a wealthy and kind man who would become her husband and the ancestor of King David. At first, it may have seemed like a coincidence that Ruth happened to be working in Boaz's field, but when we look at the full picture, we see God's hand at work, arranging every detail to bring about his purpose. Ruth's faithfulness and willingness to trust in God's plan opened the door for her to experience blessings she never could have imagined. God's guidance doesn't just happen in the grand moments of life. It's woven into the very fabric of our daily experiences. Even when we feel like we are walking through ordinary days, God is guiding us, shaping our path, and leading us toward his purpose for our lives. We often think of God's guidance as something that only happens in the big life-changing moments. But the truth is that he is constantly working in our lives, even in the smallest details. Every decision we make, every choice, and every interaction is part of a much larger divine plan that is unfolding in ways we can't always see. God uses the seemingly mundane and ordinary moments to lead us in extraordinary directions. Sometimes God's guidance is clear and direct. We might receive a revelation,